What I want to cover on today's episode is sort of my journey. People have always asked me, Eric, how did you get to this point? Like, how do you get from where you were to 20, 30, 40 years ago, that path that you take? And I'd love to share it because that's what I'm always fascinated with. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. I hope you know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's always good seeing you virtually, even though I can't see you. I can see you, right? And you can see me, and I can feel the energy. So let's go ahead and have some fun today. And what I want to cover on today's episode is sort of my journey. People have always asked me, Eric, how did you get to this point? Like, how do you get from where you were to 20, 30, 40 years ago, that path that you take? And I'd love to share it because that's what I'm always fascinated with, right? When you go in and you look at folks like a Richard Branson or an Oprah Winfrey, it's easy today to see why they are the best. But what I always love to know is, what was that first step? What was that second step, right? When they were just anybody sitting in a classroom in elementary or high school, what were those steps that they took differently than anyone else to get to where they were, to have them become that person they are? So that's what we're going to talk about here, is what I sort of call not only the journey, but listening to that voice within you. Every one of us, you can call it gut instinct, right? You can call it your heart. You can call it the voice. Depending on your religious background, you can call it a variety of names, from God to Allah to others. But the point is, every one of us has a voice that speaks to us at some level, right? That tells us we should do something or we shouldn't do something. And it's one of those things that at the moment, they seem somewhat insignificant, but when you look back, they often are life-changing. So the question I always ask, no matter where you are, whether you're 15, whether you're 30, whether you're 50, or whether you're 80, it's never too late to listen. But world-class individuals, those that have amazing lives, are those that are willing to listen to that voice when it doesn't make any sense. And the question I always ask is this: are you fully committed to your life, to your career, to being a world-class CISO? That if you're driving, imagine you're driving at night without the lights on in the pitch black, and all of a sudden, the voice speaks to you and says, in 3, 2, 1, turn 90 degrees. The question is, what do you do? Most of us pause and hesitate and go, but what if there's not a road? But what if there's not? And then we miss it. And then we keep going. But the ones that have that amazing life are the ones that go and turn the wheel, right? So I just urge you, right? Start listening. Right? We talk about the power of communication, and everybody thinks communication is all about talking, which I do a lot of. But it's also just as important to listen. So I like giving that backdrop when I talk about my career and my life, because you'll notice there's a lot of those little moments where the voice said to do something, and I could have said no. In most cases, I said yes. And that's the real reason why I'm here today. So you need to have that trust in yourself. So let's go back to the beginning. Now, we're not going to go way back to the beginning. We don't need to go back into the labor and delivery room when Eric was born, because honestly, I don't remember a whole lot of that either. And that just gets weird really quick. So we're not going to go back there. And we don't have to cover geeky Eric wearing plaid and brown shirts in the class pictures. Yes, yes, yes. If you ever go back and look at your elementary school pictures, and there's always that one kid that has the ugliest jacket and the ugliest shirt, like everyone else is in t-shirts and polos, and there's that one weird kid with the tie and the suit on, and you're like, what is wrong with those parents? Do they not like him? That was me, right? So that was me. Now, that might explain a lot, or that might not explain a lot there. But I was sort of geeky on that front. But we don't need to go through that segment of it, because what most of you are really interested in is the career side. So we'll go back to 1986. That's a great year, 1986. I'm a senior in high school. Or the summer before I'm a senior in high school, and you're deciding what you want to do with your life, what you want to major in. Now, to be honest, I personally think that is one of the cruelest things we do to our children. At 16, 17, 18, depending on when they started, their brain isn't even fully developed. They have very limited experience of the world and occupations, and we want them to decide what they are going to do for the rest of their lives. Right? If we think about it, it's crazy, right? But that's what we do. That's the game we play, and I played the game like everyone else. So I loved math and science. Our high school had a Commodore 64, right, that I was able to go in after hours. Yeah, did I mention the geek part? Yeah, you'll see that coming through. So I would go after school and before school, and I would play around with the Commodore 64, programming in BASIC, programming some games and some things like that, and just sort of fascinated with the computer and how it works and the programming languages and things like that. Now, back then, my plan was to become an architect, because I was, and I still am, fascinated with structures. Do you ever stop and look at the Verrazano Bridge or a tall building, and you're like, how did they design and build that, right? To me, it's an amazing, amazing feat when you really appreciate and understand what's going on with structure. So I thought it would be cool to understand the mechanics behind it and be able to design and build creative things. So I was going to head off and become an architect. But like I said, the voice, right? Interesting things happen that changed that. So I remember sitting at the dining room table, and a family friend that my parents have known for a really long time, we were talking about careers and what I was going to do, and that I was going to be an architect and all this great stuff. And he goes, but Eric, I know you talked about that Commodore 64 and computers. I know it's very early on, remember 86, early on with computers, but computers are going to take over the world. So why don't you major in computer science, learn how computers work, program, and be able to understand how they work and operate, and then you can do anything. If you understand and know how to utilize a computer, then you can be an architect, an engineer, or any of those other areas. So why don't you focus in on this new career area that a few of the tech schools started offering, called computer science? Sounded like good advice, right? It made a lot of sense. I enjoyed the dinky little Commodore 64, and I could have always take architecture classes and move into that, but the computers are going to be the foundation for the future. I agreed with that and bought in. So I said, that sounds like a good plan. So I majored in computer science. Now, back then, when you go to school or college in computer science, they really didn't have computer science programs like they do today. It was a basic computer science program, but it was really EE on steroids. You had to take physics. What does a computer scientist need to understand physics? I mean, it's like, I just don't understand that, or calculus, or finite mathematics, or differential equation, right? But it was what it was. So I'm sitting there, my second semester, I remember in a Fortran class, right after my calculus class, right after my physics class, and I'm sitting there going, what am I doing? I don't like any of this stuff. If this is what a computer scientist does, tap out, right? And I was starting to look at, do I go back to architect? My family was pushing me in accounting because I love maths and meticulous and love that level of detail. But I'm like, wait a second, I committed to this. Let me see what's going on. So I decided that I needed to go down to the intern office and get an intern in computer science. I still remember it like it was yesterday. All of a sudden, I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks. But on this particular Thursday, I'm sitting in that Fortran class, and it comes over me like a control. You must go to the intern office today. Right? It was like, it just all of a sudden hit me like this was a non-negotiable. Right? This was my purpose for existing, is I had to go today to the intern office. Now, New York Tech was a very spread out campus. So the buildings were anywhere from a 10 or 15 minute walk. And where the co-op office was a 15-minute walk from the engineering building. And lo and behold, what do you think happened when I stepped out of class? It was raining. And I didn't have an umbrella because I didn't think it was going to rain that day. So, options, right? You're always going to be tested in your path. You're always going to be tested in your career. So I could have easily taken the short walk back and said, I'll go to the co-op office another day, or the 15-minute trek and get soaking wet. But like I said, there was a reason I believe that I needed to go that day. So I show up at 4:15, and little do I know they close at 4:30. And I walk in, and I announce that I'm a computer science major, and I would like to sign up for an intern because I'm not sure what a computer scientist does, and I'd like to know before I continue taking all these classes. And I still remember the lady behind the counter sort of leans back, gives me a look and says, so who told you? I'm like, who told me what? She goes, I'm sure you're down here because of the CIA. I'm like, the CIA who? She's like, the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm like, I'm totally lost now. I'm thinking like they're spying on me and implanting bugs in my, I'm like, what in the world is this lady talking about? And then she finally explained, she goes, once every 2 years, the CIA comes and recruits on campus, and we don't make a big deal about it because we have to be very careful and limited in the students we give them because there's only a certain number of slots and everybody wants to interview. And they're coming tomorrow, and somebody just canceled, and there's one slot left. Do you want it? I can't make this stuff up. Right? When I tell this story, people are like, really? I'm like, yeah, I cannot make this up. That's exactly what happened. So I'm like, sure. Now I knew why I had to go down today, because the CIA came once every 2 years, and I would have missed the opportunity. So I said, absolutely. So basically, on the way home from school, I had to swing by Burlington Coat Factory and get a suit, right? Because I didn't even have a suit back then, right? Like many college students did, and get ready for this interview with the CIA. Now, it's interesting because most people found my background to be pretty boring. I'm one of those folks, right or wrong. I didn't drink until I was 21, right? My first drink was when my 21st birthday with some friends. Didn't do a lot of recreational things. Geek, right? That geek thing, right? That geek thing keeps someone up there. So I was pretty geeky, right? Most people not very impressed. The CIA was very impressed of how boring my life was, right? Because that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody who was boring, right? They could basically pass and get through all the tests. So I go in and I fill out all the paperwork, and the interview goes great. They give me the big packet of information. Sorry, I'm so excited. I'm getting ahead of myself. So reset, Eric, reset. So I'm giving you way too much information here. That's okay. That's okay. I just had my NAD IV, so my brain's like in hyper cognitive mode here. So yeah, I periodically like to get an IV. Intravenous with vitamins and NAD. It really helps with cognitive and brain. So I just got that. So my brain is like super on fire here. But we're having fun. And I don't cut videos. We cut it the way we cut it, and we have a good time. So I just gave you about 20 pieces. So let's back up. So I show up that Friday morning, go into the interview with the CIA, and they ask a series of questions. I ask a few questions. Remember, they didn't have a chance to prep me. So they're basically putting me in cold. So I just got to be authentic Eric. They didn't tell me or train me on anything. And at the end of the interview, I remember he nods his head like this and he says, hold on. And he goes into his briefcase and he takes out a very thick manila envelope and he hands it to me. And he goes, we would like you to fill this out. I said, okay. He didn't say what it was, that it was a job application, that they were interested, they wanted me to apply as an intern for the CIA. He just said, we want you to fill this out. So I come out of the interview with the manila envelope, and the folks from the co-op office that are sitting there, their eyes get really big, and they're like, what did you do? I'm like, I didn't do anything, I promise. Like I did something wrong or something. They're like, no. How did you do that? And once again, I'm like, why can't you people just tell me what's happening, man? You talking these things like I know what's going on, just like yesterday. I'm like, what are you people talking about? They go, Eric, we have 30 people that interview, and less than 5% get an envelope. An envelope means you pass the interview. It means they want you to apply for an intern with the CIA. And do you realize today, out of the 26, because I was near the end, 26 interviews, you're the only second person that got an envelope. I'm like, cool, go Eric, right? Team Eric, woohoo! And they're like, great, now you have to do the hard work. Now you have to go back and fill out this application. Now remember, this is in the late 80s. We didn't have online. The web wasn't even invented yet. So this is paper and pencil. This is like a 70-page form where you had to go back 3 generations, right? To track and verify and validate all that, which was a great time with my parents. I still remember it was fun going back and doing all the research into our parents and great-grandparents and where they came from, right? You don't have all these ancestry.coms like you did back then or anything. So it was a fun little journey to go through with my parents. So we fill out the application, I put it in the mail, and I send it off. And then I call them and they're like, oh, you don't call us, we call you. Forget you filled in the application. You might hear from us in 6, 9, or 12 months, or you might never hear from us again. I'm like, wonderful. So a few weeks later, I go back to the co-op office and I'm like, okay, I really appreciate having a slot with the CIA and mailing in the application, but they're basically saying that it could take 9 or 12 months before I hear anything. I don't want to wait that long to see whether I like computer science or not. So do you have anything else for me? And they said, well, we actually do. At the time, Grumman Aerospace, they build the F-14s and other military jets. They were very big and active on Long Island. And they said, actually, Grumman is always hiring interns. They usually hire engineers, but I know they want to move into computer science, so let me make a few calls and maybe we can get you in. So make a few calls. Long story short, I am now doing a summer and a semester. So you take off a semester from college, you do 9 months, and I'm working at Grumman Aerospace as a security engineer for the radar systems for the F-14 fighter jets. So I'm basically playing in the simulators trying to look at any exposures or issues or anything having to do with the radar system with the airplane. So it was super cool and super fun. Once again, I didn't think much of it because once again, I just wanted some experience. I got to do some programming, some database, and I'm like, this is sort of cool. This is sort of cool stuff. The fact that I was in the security division for the radar really didn't hit me. Didn't really understand what that was because honestly, I didn't do a lot of security. Back then, I just did some basic testing and analysis like a co-op would. Then I'm finishing up that work, and I remember getting a phone call from the CIA saying, we would like to fly you down to Virginia and continue the process. And I'm like, well, that's well and good, but I already just took off a semester from school, but okay, let's see where this goes. So I jump on a plane and fly down to Washington, D.C. First time in Washington, D.C. by myself. Super cool. If you've never been to D.C., you might, even if you're not from this country, it's just, I love cities, right? Moscow is beautiful, right? All the different cities around the world, but D.C. is just a special place. A lot of history there. So I fly down, we go through all the tests, we go through everything, all those things, and I'm like, great. What's going to happen now? And it was, once again, okay, you don't call us, we'll call you. You might never hear from us again. You might hear from us in 3 or 4 months. You never know. And I'm like, really? This is how things operate? So I'm like, fine. Because I had my Grumman Aerospace intern. I was good. So finish up my Grumman intern, start my next semester, and I get a call again from the CIA saying, listen, we'd like to formally offer you an intern with the CIA. Woohoo! So we want you to come back down to interview for where you're going to work. Now, what they didn't tell me, but I figured out very quickly because it was obvious, is this was a reverse interview. It wasn't for them to interview me to see if I got the job, because guess what? I got the job. It was for them to convince me to work for their department versus somebody else. Because what I didn't realize at the time is interns at the CIA have full clearances. They have full access. They basically perform the work as a full-time employee, but they don't count against your budget. So everybody wants you. I think there's a song, everybody wants you, right? So it became quickly very obvious when I went down there that like they are overselling me on this. And I'm sitting there going, I thought you're interviewing me, but it's clear that I'm interviewing you and I get to decide. So I talked with some networking groups, some software groups, some operational groups, and then this group called Office of Security. And I go back and I ask all my professors and everyone I know for advice. And it almost seemed universal that everyone said, Eric, go for networking. Computers are going to be interconnected. This thing, this test environment, remember, we're still pre-World Wide Web here. We're still pre the web. This thing called the web is going to take off. Sorry, this thing called the internet is going to take off, and networking is where it's at. Anybody that knows the protocols and the communication are going to be dominant. But I said, I want to do cybersecurity. Eric. This is what my professor did. Because Eric. It's a fad. It's a fad. There's no way we're going to build computers that have vulnerabilities. These computers are going to be secure. They're going to be safe. This is not a career that you can make in cybersecurity. Did I actually get that out with a straight face? That actually is the advice that I got in, I think it was 1990 at this point in time. But also, I listened to the family friend that said computer science because it made sense. But the trick is this. It's always good to get advice. It's always good to get input. But at the end of the day, it's your journey. The journey that you get to choose, that you get to pick and you get to decide. So don't let other people determine or force the journey that you're going to take. So I decided I'm not going to listen to anybody else, and I'm going to intern in cybersecurity. So finish up that semester and go back down for a summer semester again. So I basically, my last 3 years of my bachelor's was one semester, tons of credit, right? And then 9 months doing an intern. So I sort of did a semester of school and then 9 months working either at Grumman or the CIA. So I go down and I start working with the Office of Security and loved it. Like my first summer intern, I had to test and evaluate a brand new operating system from this company, this small company called Microsoft. And the operating system I had to test was called this thing, Windows NT. And they weren't sure if they should go with that or one of the other options that were available, like NetWare and OS 10. I remember all the, so I mean, crazy world, right? Memory lane. So I got to work on testing and evaluating and verifying Windows 10. So great time. Things worked out wonderful. I continued every summer semester to go back to the CIA. And my second to last one was interesting because I go down there only for them to tell me, Eric, we're basically disbanding the Office of Security. It's being embedded into other functions or other areas. We no longer exist. Now, the bad news is you don't have a position. The good news is you do, because there are plenty of people that want computer scientists, so you just have to find a new home. We can help you. You're definitely going to stay. You're definitely going to have a job. It's just going to be in a different area than when you anticipated. So I started asking around and asking my roommates and friends, and they're like, oh, you need to talk to this group and this group and this group and this group. So I finally went in and talked to this one group that was doing communications, and they started working in this area called AI, artificial intelligence. We're now at about 92, 93 time frame, right? So now I have some of the cybersecurity, and now they're like, Eric, we want to go in and we're looking for a programmer that can actually program these AI systems to do predictive analysis. And right now we have a huge need because this was shortly after the Conzi incident. If you're not familiar with that, this was an incident, I believe it happened right around 91, 92, where a gentleman by the name of Conzi pulled outside CIA headquarters on Route 123, opened fired with an automatic weapon, injuring and killing many people, immediately went to Dulles Airport and fled to Pakistan, where there's no extradition treaty with the United States. Now, government agencies and CIA, we're very big on protect your own. You don't mess with our house, and if you do, we're coming after you. So they had a task force of basically psychologists that were focused on catching Conzi. They were working with the FBI and other entities, but they needed somebody to build a predictive analysis system. Essentially, what they wanted is Eric, we have all this data on how this individual operates. We want you to build an AI system, an artificial intelligence system, that we can put in certain events and it will predict his behavior. It will predict his output. So it's basically an expert system. I mean, if this, then this, then that, then this. So I said, that sounds really cool. More important to me was the mission. Yes, it wasn't cybersecurity, but it was a mission that we were helping to track down a bad person. So I'm like, that really resonated with me and the mission and purpose behind it. So I said, great, I'll do that. So I worked with them and we built out this predictive analysis system, got a lot of awards, lot of work in that. Ultimately, they were able to work with the FBI and capture Kanzi and bring him back to the United States to serve trial. So justice was served at one level in terms of what happened and what occurred. And then we finished that task, and the group I was working with pivoted and said, what if we apply AI to cybersecurity? And I'm like, the mothership is calling me home. Right? The mothership is calling me home. This is exactly what I've been waiting for. So notice, paths always collide. So now I'm working with them on building AI-based systems for cybersecurity to be able to go in and perform certain activity and certain functions on the internet. But then, pivotal moment. I'm sitting there in the bubble. If you've ever seen any Tom Clancy movies, it's a big auditorium in Langley, Virginia. And we're having an all-hands meeting for our department, and they're talking about how they're going to use the internet for communication systems. Now, I was young and didn't know politics and didn't know you're not supposed to ask questions. So I'm sitting there and I'm raising my hand for a question. And I remember my boss looking back and she's like, put your hand down. And I'm like, oh, she's waving to me. She's like, you don't ask questions at these events. But I ask a question and they call on me and I go, question. How do we know these systems are secure? Life-changing. Because in the government, if you ask a question that nobody knows the answer to, you're volunteering to solve it. So they looked around and said, Eric, thank you for being willing to solve that problem for us. And I'm like, I wasn't asking to solve it. I was just asking a question. But that took me on an amazing journey because it turns out there is no way to prove a system is secure. The only way you can prove it's secure is by breaking in or hacking it. You can only prove it's secure by showing it's non-secure. So that took me on a multi-year journey where I was a professional hacker for the CIA. And I loved it, loved every moment of it, but you get to a point in time where there's a decision to make. When you get to about 10 years at government, it's a pivot point. You have to decide, do I stay for another 10 and get the retirement and pension, or do I check out and basically move into the commercial sector? So for many reasons, I decided it was time to move on. And I love working at the CIA, don't regret it. I would have definitely done it again. But the two big lessons learned was, one, I didn't like working for other people. I realized I'm really an entrepreneur. I love creating and coming up with new ideas. And the second thing I realized was offense is easy. You can always get in. So that's when I decided to leave the CIA and pursue a career as a cybersecurity entrepreneur in defending and securing computer systems. And at this point, I'll leave you there in suspense. And next week, we'll jump into part 2 of my journey, where we'll look at life after the CIA, the companies I've worked at, built, and how I got to where I am today. So make sure you join us next week for part 2 of the Dr. Cole Journey.